Lessons from Books, The Development of the Soul. We're looking at the Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Please subscribe, share, like the videos, leave a comment, and I will respond. Yes, you've been told to read this book, but you haven't read it because maybe it's too long, maybe it's too depressing and dark, and you just don't want to go there, but maybe it's just too long. So anyway, just check out this one chapter, The Ascent. It's about 15 pages. It's on Jordan Peterson's website. I've made a tiny URL to get you there easier. tinyurl.com/JBP Gulag. Read this chapter. Let me give you one story from this chapter. So we're talking about the Gulag prison camps where Alexander Solzhenitsyn had been sent, and he had just had surgery on a tumor while in the prison camp. Now, not the doctor that had surgery on him, but another doctor who was also a prisoner, Boris Kornfeld, is keeping him company. And Kornfeld is talking about his awakening and his understanding of Christianity and his faith. And he explains to Solzhenitsyn, there is no punishment that comes to us that is undeserved. Which is strange to tell people in a prison camp where many of the prisoners are there for things that aren't really wrong. I mean, they've been Article 58'd. You look that up in the book. They didn't really do anything, and yet now they're in prison camps. Their rights have been taken away. And Solzhenitsyn, he's just had surgery, so he's not really saying anything, but he's thinking to himself, I'm doing 10 years hard labor for criticizing Stalin in a private letter. I wrote a letter to my friend where I made a bad remark about Stalin, and now I'm spending 10 years in a prison camp. How is this deserved? He doesn't say that, but he's thinking it. Kornfeld goes on, go through your life. You'll find a transgression worth this blow. And then Kornfeld later on finds a bed to lay down in, goes to sleep, and before Kornfeld wakes up, he's bludgeoned to death. He's murdered. And Solzhenitsyn thinks to himself, those were his last words. His last words on this planet were to me, and they were to tell me that I have transgressed and that every punishment is deserved. But how can this be? I'm innocent. I haven't done anything, but there's got to be something here because that's it. This is a big moment. So he thinks about it and he ponders and he thinks and he thinks and he thinks about, we're the prisoners. We're innocent. I wrote a letter where I barely said anything bad about Stalin and I get 10 years in a prison labor camp. So, well, maybe we transgressed in some way, but compared to the prison guards, compared to our torturers, we're innocent and yet we're being punished. They're torturing us. They're guilty and yet they're not punished. How could that be? This doesn't make any sense at all. So then he has to question how he's making this sense. And then he starts to question, well, what is the meaning of everything? And if you ask yourself, well, maybe the meaning of life is not prosperity. Maybe the meaning of life is not accumulating wealth, accumulating property, prestige, elite professional status. Maybe it's not about being the top of your field or the number one person in your profession or the number one person in your community, or having the biggest house and having the most money. Maybe prosperity isn't the reason that human beings are on this earth. And he's thinking about what he's experiencing. He's thinking about what Kornfeld's saying. He's thinking, well, what if meaning is not about becoming this important person who owns stuff, but it's about becoming a human being? Maybe the reason human beings are here is to become better human beings with better souls and better hearts, more compassionate, more caring, more human, as opposed to just owning stuff. And when you look at it through that lens, when you look at the meaning of life as developing as a human being, as opposed to developing as someone who owns stuff, well, then you look at the person that's being tortured, the prisoner, and you look at the prison guard that's doing the torturing. Who in this scenario is developing as a human being? Who has now the opportunity to develop their soul, to develop their heart? Who is growing? It's clearly the people being punished, the innocent people being punished, being tortured. They're being given a gift in a sense. If you see the meaning of life as developing as a human being, who's developing? It's the prisoner. It's the people wasting away in the gulag. It's the people doing hard labor, sun up to sundown. Meanwhile, the prison guard, the person doing the torture, maybe they've accumulated wealth, maybe they have a house, maybe they have property, maybe they have status, maybe they have badges and shoulder boards. Maybe they have prestige and people call them by a specific name and they have a prefix that they utter before they can say their name. But are they developing as a human being? Are they developing their soul and their heart? Are they becoming more human? No, they're not. And so when you see this, now the words of Kornfeld start to make sense. These prison guards aren't developing, they're turning into swine. They're becoming less human. They have less of a soul. And then he starts to think about his own transgressions. And he thinks about these bad guys, these evil torturers. But then he also thinks of himself and says, hey, look, I was marching in 1941 into East Prussia. We were burning, we were destroying, we were killing. We were a part of the army. We were a part of the war. I was there with the shoulder boards and the medals. Was I a good guy? Was I a bad guy? Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? Did I have transgressions that I am being punished for? And he thinks about this, and he thinks because he had this opportunity as a prisoner in the Gulag, because he was tortured and forced to hard labor for 10 years. He's been given the opportunity to develop his soul. He's been given the opportunity to develop his heart and become more of a human being. And by becoming more of a human being, he understands what it means to be a human being. He understands the meaning of human beings, but he also understands other human beings in this life. And he realizes that there aren't good or bad people. Because he's been a bad person and he's been a good person. He can't be both. And that a prison guard that's torturing him, that's not a good or bad person. What he realizes is that we're all good or bad. The thin line between good and evil cuts through the hearts of all men. We're all good. We're all evil. We're all capable of this at different times. And the reason for religion is to constrict the evil inside us. This animation was supposed to come a little bit later, like right now. But the reason for the religions, the reason for the ideas that Kornfeld's talking about, these punishments, these deserved punishments for transgression, is simply to constrict, to restrain the evil inside of us all, because we're all good, but we're also all capable of evil, just as when he was in the army and then when he was the prisoner. And then just as the prison guard is experiencing their moment of evil. The reason for religion, then, is to constrict this, to hold this back. And so he was given the opportunity to experience this as a prisoner, to have this enlightened moment, to understand that, yes, this was the worst time of his life. But through this terrible experience, through this punishment, it was actually him that was benefiting. And it's the prison guards who are losing out by not being punished. By being punished, there is an awakening, there is an enlightening, there is an understanding that you can embrace and accept. But if you're not punished, then you actually are punished, because you have to live with this terrible guilt. You have to live with this tarnished, damaged soul, with this broken heart, this sobbing, this weakness. So you look at it from the two perspectives of, yes, the physical pain and torture of being a prisoner is awful. But the development of the soul is exponential. Whereas the soldier, although does not experience physical abuse, or the prison guard does not experience physical abuse, but does not develop as a human being and devolves into a pig-like swine, according to Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And so because of that, he says, bless you, prison. Because it's given them this understanding of what it means to be human and a way to understand everyone and to understand the life around him, to make sense of an otherwise senseless world. But in true Solzhenitsyn humor, and from beyond the grave come replies, it's very well for you to say that when you came out alive. And it's true. Solzhenitsyn can bless prison for this development. Many others went to the Gulag and didn't survive. They didn't experience an awakening. They didn't experience enlightenment or development of the soul. They were murdered. They were killed.